Hey Scott, how are you today?
It's good to be back with you, David. How are you?
I'm excellent. I'm excellent. Today we are going to talk about the immune system because it's the fall. People get colds, they get the flu, they get all kinds of stuff. My first question for you is why do people get colds and the flu in this season?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? I mean, the classic sort of myth that we heard with some actual truth is like, don't go outside when it's cold without your coat. You're going to, catch cold in quotes, right? We do know that many bugs live longer in colder temperatures because of hibernation. We know if we hibernate, if our body's going to slow down, we can live a longer time. A lot of these bugs out there actually will live longer because of the colder temperatures. There is some truth to that on some level. Now, just because you are exposed to a virus, for example, or exposed to any types of bugs, doesn't mean you're going to get sick, of course, as well, right? And so, one of the things that I always like to remind people is that we all breathe, right? And when you breathe or when you swallow, you have the outside environment coming into you in full throttle at all times, right? And so if you live in New York City, of course, or if you are a teacher and you live in an environment most of your day with lots of kids, you're going to have different environments, right? But you know that over time, if a new teacher is coming to a school and they have little kids, like initially the first couple of years, they get really sick, lots of colds and infections and things. But then after that, they get better, right? Their immune system kind of optimizes, and then you know that teachers have like the most powerful immune systems ever, right? So and they're being subject to that stuff still all the time, right? It's not like it changes. It's just their immune system is getting optimized over time, and it's the same thing where anybody would live, right? So this all has to do actually with multiple different things, but in the end, our immune system is supposed to be trialed. It's supposed to be, getting this kind of exposure on a daily basis. And if we don't, actually, we have a higher propensity of getting sick as we get older. So one of the things I was really worried about actually in the beginning of the pandemic, I didn't know I was going to go here, but this is interesting, right? So, in the beginning of the pandemic, right, what do we all have to do? We had to stay home, right? Nobody could go outside, nobody could leave. And I was living in California at the time, and we had some family friends and some, kids that had friends and next to us. After about a year in, they're like, you know what? Like it's been so hard to be home the whole year, but our kids haven't gotten sick and we're just so awesome. I'm like, no, that's exactly what they're supposed to do. Like we need to get sick when we're younger. Of course, sick to a degree, right? We need to have these exposures to our immune system. This is with adults as well, but especially with kids, because if you don't have these exposures, your immune system is not going to be primed enough. It's not going to be just like exercise. It's not going to be exercised enough to know what's an infection and what's not an infection, like what's human. And so the more that we get exposed to bugs, the less we have a propensity for having autoimmune conditions. So autoimmune conditions are when the body starts attacking itself, right? That's why it's called autoimmune. But interesting, you find in like areas around the world where there are more infections, whether it be virus, fungus, bacteria, protozoa, there's a much lower risk of autoimmune conditions in those particular countries compared to countries that have much more hygiene and less of those infections. And the correlation here is with how much your immune system is being exercised on a regular basis. So if you are exercising your immune system all the time, you're going outside, you're going places. We'll talk about how you have to have an optimized gut for this as well, because the gut is where you have 80% of your immune system. And you go outside and you go on a subway in New York City and everybody's coughing, right? Versus somebody else in New York City that's going on and then, doesn't get good sleep and they're staying inside all the time. Maybe they're still wearing masks because they're worried. And I get that, but you kind of understand what I mean. They're just not being subject to a lot of stuff on a regular basis. Like they're going to be in much higher risk, hypothetically, to get that, cold that was going around the subway car compared to somebody that was not. So, but in general, to go back to your question, because I kind of took a little bit of a leeway there, is that in the cold, there are a number of things that are going on. But the first that I wanted to point out is that bugs do last longer. But there are other things like light exposure, for example, right? We're often indoors more often, so we're not getting as much light. Light is very important to optimize our immune system, something called vitamin D, which of course, all of us know that vitamin D is a very important immune system hormone. It regulates inflammation. It's very, very important. And there's a lot of other things I can talk about here, but let me just stop and see what questions you have before I keep rambling.
Okay, so we got longer living bugs, we got less light.
Yeah.
What are the things that we need to be doing outside of assuming we didn't grow up in a third world country and are continually exposed to protozoa? What does Westerners need to be doing in the fall to optimize our immune system?
Yeah, so there's lots of things we can do, right? I mean, I think that, and when I was going down the sort of sunlight train, think about what happens in the winter for many of us. We want like, our warm comfort foods, right? And we tend to not eat as well and to eat more in the wintertime. Although naturally, we would have like back, when Paleolithic times, we would have things that were, warmer, like soups were very important at that point, animal meat. But back then, we didn't have, as much food during the winter time. In fact, we know that when you go on fast, for example, like intermittent fasting, for example, like is actually a good way to regulate your immune system. So when your body goes into like mild ketogenic states, so when that's your fat burning instead of carbohydrate burning, you're actually optimizing your immune system function. So it's good to do some intermittent fasting during the winter time. If you weren't doing it in the summer, that's actually not as it's important, but if you're gonna do more fasting, I do recommend people do it more in the wintertime for this reason, actually, because of this rebuilding and re-optimizing your immune system when you're doing this, right? When you're taking these breaks from food. It doesn't have to mean like you're getting 24-hour fast every day or like one meal a day or even every week. It just, maybe you just eat for 12 hours that day instead of for 16 or whatever it might be. So even cutting it down a little bit can be very helpful. You also want to make sure you're eating like a very nutrient-rich diet, right? And you want to make sure you're getting, good vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. You want to stay away from foods that are going to be high in inflammation in general. So generally your fried foods, your seed oil foods that are, obviously fried in seed oil are even worse. And just making sure that you're getting a decent amount of protein as well is really important, as well as because it's very important for a lot of the enzymatic reactions that are important to your immune system, along with minerals. So getting good, mineral supplementation or getting minerals in your diet. And of course, staying hydrated is really important with this as well. The more dehydrated you are, the more your system's going to be under stress. So you have to make sure that you're getting enough good hydration. There's some like these basic parameters that I use for my clients, like 2.8 liters a day for women and 3.2, I think, for men. Like that's at like baseline-ish. But if you're much more active, you might want to have more than that. If you are more active, you may want to be thinking you have like electrolytes or at least minerals in your water if you can as well. Water is really important to flush our system, right? We need to flush our system. And where do we flush our toxins? We flush our toxins in our kidneys. So, when we filter out things from our blood, they come into our kidneys. And then our liver is really important for liver detoxification. So when we talk about liver detox, we want to think about, how we optimizing, detoxification in general, but liver function here, that would include just, being careful with the alcohol, being anything that's going to be stressing your liver on a regular basis, but especially alcohol for most people, right? So decreasing the alcohol intake. Also, exercising is really important. So many of us during the winter times will forget, or they just don't have the capacity because, again, it's cold outside or something, that they don't get as much exercise as they did. But exercise is really important for circulation. It's really important for the immune system. It's really important overall for, our body to kind of be more recalibrated from a sympathetic and parasympathetic balance perspective. And what I mean for those that are listening, is that sympathetic is a kind of like our fight or flight, like get shit done kind of thing. And then our parasympathetic is like rest, recover, relax, and also detoxify as well. So if you cannot get more parasympathetic, you're not going to be able to heal from an injury or from inflammation. You're also going to be at higher risk over time to depress your immune system function, because the one stress hormone that can be good in the short term but bad in the long term is something called cortisol. Cortisol is really important because it's a stress hormone, but if it's upregulated for long periods of time with chronic stress, you can see that the immune system does take a big hit from that. And that's actually very common. If I had to say one thing for people to do in the wintertime, would be to balance their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, actually. Like that's like the one main thing. But exercise helps you do that. Like it really does help balance your by stressing the system actually with exercise, which is interesting, right? You can actually see a balance with your nervous system's better as a result of that. And I think most people know that, right? After they work out, they can feel like they just feel more balanced. They just feel more relaxed. Part of that's related to some of the hormones that are released when you exercise, but that's also hormone ecosystem, or milieu. I always like that word, hormone ecosystem, that is more balanced and more parasympathetic tilted actually after you do exercise. And it's also good for so many other reasons, right? But obviously we know exercise is kind of a big deal. So those are some of the main ones that we can get into some novel things, like, of course, like red light therapy and like, going into cold exposure and like, peptides. There's so many things you can do for your immune system. But I think in the end, David, I think what I want people to mostly focus on is like what they can do without, it doesn't cost them anything. So it doesn't cost anything to not eat. I always like to tell people that. So it'll save you on your grocery bills a little bit. It does cost a little bit more to eat well. I do agree with that, in the sense of, unfortunately, we have commodity farming, and we have subsidized food that makes all of our processed foods so inexpensive, and our unprocessed foods more expensive. But hopefully that'll change at some point. If when you do eat, I try to eat clean as best as possible as well. Balancing that parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system is really the key.
So I heard you say about 100 ounces of water, if I did my math right.
It's a lot. Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. You want to keep hydrated. Yeah. But again, I don't usually recommend water on its own the whole time. Like I would recommend like some at least mineral water if you can find it, or adding some like a little bit of electrolytes. It doesn't have to be a lot, just because what actually to get water to absorb, you need to have some electrolytes in the water to be able to do that. If you just have distilled water or even reversed, yeah, or even RO, like RO without minerals is a bad idea because like this is reverse osmosis. Like for example, like in my house, we have an RO filter for the entire house. I think you have these too, right? At least probably not in New York City because maybe an under the sink one there. RO is great because it actually takes all the toxins out, but you have to realize it. Otherwise, it's not going to be absorbed as well either.
Right, right. The other thing that sort of comes to mind is sauna as we're talking about this.
Yeah, sauna is great. I think you have a sauna in your house too, right, David? I have an infrared sauna here. Back in 2016, when I found out my wife was surprisingly pregnant with our fourth kid, and we lived in a 1,000 square foot house in California with 3 bedrooms and 1 bath. It was my first big purchase. Like I purchased an infrared sauna, and it has been like one of the best purchases ever. I use it almost every night. And the nice thing about infrared, and there's different types of saunas, so we can talk about that because I think that's important. So I use an infrared on a regular basis. I think it's fantastic. Heating up the body and then also sweating can be very, very helpful from a toxin detoxification perspective. So mostly we detox with our liver and our kidneys, but our skin also helps us detox as well. And some of you may have gone into saunas and had weird colored stuff come out of you at times. And that is so that you know that you can detox that way as well. And our skin is actually the way that one of my colleagues, Dr. Ted, actually, he likes to describe it is like our skin is like a reverse gut. Like you can so the skin is the outside environment, like, and it's subject to everything on the outside environment all the time. And our gut is inside of us, but also doing the same thing. So you want to think about your skin as like this organ that's helping you with many different things as a barrier, but also as a detoxifier as well. So yeah, I like infrared sauna a lot. It also improves your immune system function. The high heat saunas are also good. I'll tell my patients it's more like exercise. Like if a high heat sauna getting to 180 to 220 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 to 20 minutes it's legitimately exercise without having to exercise. But that's good because as we talked about, exercise is really good for immune system. It also it's been well studied, obviously, for longevity. Some of my patients will use the high heat saunas at night, which I think is a little crazy, but some people can tolerate, some people can't. But I love them as a way to, in sort of bring in, exercise. It is not even an exercise in quotes. It is exercise in the wintertime, especially. So I would love one of those new ones, David. That's like a combination of the infrared high heat.
Yeah, I've been in those. Those are great.
Haven't been in? Is it easy to switch between them, or how does that work?
There's sort of duals, and it's an odd experience. So the sauna itself isn't that hot comparatively, maybe like 145 degrees or something.
Okay.
But then you have the infrared component. So I wear an Apple Watch when I go in, and I measure my heart rate.
Yeah.
So I know if my heart rate is over 100 just sitting there, I'm being affected by the heat, even though it doesn't feel the same as. There's a sauna here in Park City at my gym that's insane. I don't know. I took a meat thermometer in there to find out what it was, and it broke at 185 degrees. It's over that.
I hope it wasn't a mercury containing.
No, it's like one of those meat ones,
Oh, ones, yeah, I got you. I have a couple of those in my house, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you get up to 180 degrees, 220, your heart rate will go up to, I mean, depending on how old you are, it'll go up to 150, 170, like it'll go high. Yeah. I don't know if you were checking your heart rate in that sauna, but in the infrareds,
like 110. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So like it can go that high for people, but the infrared doesn't typically do that. Typically it keeps the heart rate somewhere between like, for most people, somewhere around like 85 to maybe 110 at the most for most people. So if you stay in there for longer periods of time, it may continue to go up from there, but it's not as much. I use a lot of infrared in a lot of my patients that are sicker as well, that have more inflammation. They're going through chronic infection, chronic inflammatory conditions. They tend to do better with the lower heat. And what's nice about infrared heat is that it kind of hits you up from the inside. So like, whereas like you feel like your body is just sort of like heating up inside and then you just start sweating, as opposed to like the 180 to 220 degrees, it's like you're just being bludgeoned with heat. Like your body's just like, oh my God, this is, yeah. I went to a place a couple months ago with a friend of mine here, just in Boulder, like this pop-up And I hadn't done the high heat in a while, especially with somebody. Like we were talking the whole time, and then we went to cold afterwards. And like I was just done after a couple rounds. I hadn't slept that well. Like I got like 2.5 hours of deep sleep, which I never get. Like I get like an hour and a half, which is good. But like I woke up the next day and I was just like, what was that? What just happened? So it's
You're much more an expert on this, but the way I explain it is the Finnish sauna is more of a sympathetic activator, and the infrared is more parasympathetic. So if I have a very hard workout in the gym, I do not go into the high heat sauna because
yes,
it's just upping the sympathetic
too
response.
much. Yeah, too much. Yeah.
Really, I need to downregulate at that point.
Yeah, and that's a really good way to think about it because how do we heal? How do we recover from a very heavy workout? Our goal really is to try to bring ourselves, we're talking about the sympathetic, parasympathetic earlier with the immune system. It's the same thing here. When you're exercising, you want to be in sympathetic dominance so you can make muscle, grow. You want to tear around fibers, you want to, get the motivation to do that. And then you want to cause the hormetic stress to be able to rebuild. But the rebuilding part doesn't happen if you maintain yourself in a stressful state, right? So it's a really good way to think about it. And so I talk about this a lot with patients because everybody has a very easy time for the most part, being on, right? Like the hustle is real, right? New York City, when you're in there, right? I grew up on Long Island, right? It's the hustle is real, right? Everybody's on that sort of sympathetic train. But turning off is really, really hard, right? And relaxing and trying to wind down at night. So how people are doing that is like, it's really, really important. And, of course, people are drinking, tons of caffeine as well. So, and they have a hard time sleeping because of that. And then they're taking other stimulants and they could be helpful, but how are you calming down? Like, how are you relaxing? And it's the infrared sauna for me every night is my routine, right? So I have my evening, I do my infrared sauna. I take a temperate shower. So because your body also, what's nice about, we talked a little bit about, I think I mentioned sleep when we talked about immune system optimization, maybe not, but again, sleep's really, really important to optimize. And one way to do that is to decrease your body temperature a little bit before you go to bed. That's why they say to sleep in a cold environment, but you can do that using heat as well. Also, this is an important piece is that fevers, right? So people get fevers all the time and fevers are way overtreated for in kids and adults. We see a fever, like I've worked in a hospital, and like all of a sudden we're like just running for the Tylenol. Like, where is the Tylenol? Where is the ibuprofen? Decrease that fever. No, like as long as your fever is not crazy and you don't have other really, concerning symptoms, fevers are the body's natural response to trying to kill bugs and cancer cells, interesting, and other things as well. So if you're subject to something and you have a fever, please do not run for the Tylenol and the ibuprofen. Like let the fever run its course. Now, that doesn't mean you don't want to do anything. You can use, when we think about this, David, is that sauna is a great way to decrease your body temperature, right? So you can use heat to heat your body up a little bit when you have a fever, as long as it's safe to do that, which usually it is. And then your body temperature is going to drop afterwards. And that's going to help you feel like you're defervesced, like your fever goes down for a little while. That's a much more natural way than using Tylenol or ibuprofen. And like I did something on Instagram about this a little while ago because I try to remind people that, Tylenol and ibuprofen are often, they make you feel better in the short term, but in the long term, they may be having an effect on your immune system in a detrimental way. So where you may actually have symptoms for longer as a result of taking your Tylenol and your ibuprofen. So, and I know it's hard. Like I think you know this, David, I have 4 kids, right? And so it's hard when your baby or young child is crying. I get that. Your sleep sucks and their sleep sucks and they're not happy. And so there is times to use these things. I'm not saying that, you don't want to use them at any time, but I find that like 90% of the time, if somebody has a viral infection, they have like cold, they have congestion, they have like a mild fever, they have body aches, like et cetera, right? The Tylenol and the ibuprofen are not the way to go here. So there's like natural remedies, but the reason I mention it here is we were talking about heat, but it's also an important thing for people to realize when we're talking about immune system function, let your immune system do what it needs to do if you can. Fevers are evolutionarily created so that we can get rid of bugs. It is a really great book that was written actually in the 1990s. You probably would like it. There's a guy named Randolph Nesse, and the book's called Why We Get Sick. And it's actually a very well written book. It's the sort of the germination from the book was a whole field of medicine called evolutionary medicine specifically. And the idea that there's many things that happen to us as a result of our body doing various things because of an evolutionary reason, right? So, and fevers is like the primary example. Another good example of this from a different perspective is actually like, well, this is a little bit off topic, but like sickle cell anemia. So if you have sickle cell anemia, you have red blood cells that don't carry oxygen as well, and they actually give you high risk for various things, but they do protect you from malaria as well.
Yeah.
So and that's a common example that people know where, we've evolved over, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, depending on what you believe, of course, but for the most part, we think we've evolved over a long period of time. And as a result of that, like it's important to allow these natural aspects of our biology to let them manifest, right? And this is also when we go back to things like we were talking about sleep, and we were talking about fasting, and talking about exercise. These are all evolutionary things that we would do differently in the wintertime, for sure. So we'd have a different sort of ecosystem going on there. But in the end, going back to fever, this is one of the most important ones for people to realize, is that fevers are important and that we should not be just treating them, willy-nilly with these medications if we don't need to.
I want to move to the gut. And before we do that, I just want to sleep and temperature. So my understanding is that it's the change, it's the delta in temperature that causes this onset of sleep. That's why if you get in a hot tub or something and then you go into your bed, your body temperature is falling. Same with the temperature in the room. As it affects your body, it's falling.
Right.
And it's that causes sleep.
That is, the delta is really important there. And everybody's had this experience, right? They get into it's a cold room and they get underneath their cold covers and they start warming up and it's like, oh, this is so comfortable, right? And it's like, that's a very common relaxation. And that delta kind of just throws you into, getting your sleep onset to happen faster. Yeah, good call.
Let's go to the gut.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that shockingly, the majority of our immune response, our immune cells are located in our gut. So we want a healthy gut for healthy immune response. Cold weather's coming on, we might get sick. What do we got to do for our gut?
Yeah, so about 70 to 80% of our immune system is in our gut. As we were alluding to earlier, the gut is basically outside world, right? Because it's basically what you're doing is you're breathing in also your lungs, but also you're swallowing all of your food and everything else and your saliva that's coming from the outside environment. And so your gut is the first place where we evolved an immune system, actually. Our immune system evolved from having to figure out what could come into the system and what had to stay out of the system and be expelled. And so we have a huge amount of things going on in our gut to help us understand what is self and not self, right? So that's really what the immune system is trying to do in the end. Is this something that should come in the system because it's something that we need, or is it something that should not come into the body because we don't need it, right? And so the self versus not self aspect is what the immune system is always doing to try to figure out, okay, do I create a response against this, or do we need this kind of thing, right? And so the immune system has tons of different types of immune system cells, and its real goal is to be able to do that. And so if your gut's not working well, if your gut is leaky, which is a very common thing where the gut lining itself, it's only one cell thick in the intestines, it gets turned over very, very fast, but it's only one cell thick. If that's not doing what it's supposed to do, some of the things that's supposed to be kept outside the body get in, okay? And when that happens, there creates an immune system response, right? Because now the immune system in the body is like, oh, this is not supposed to be here, right? And so then it creates an inflammatory response. So you have this, gut microbiota brain connection as well. So the microbiota, what's going on in your gut, the organisms in there are also very important. And they are communicating with your gut. They're communicating, with your cells in your gut. They're communicating with your brain as well and your immune system. We also know that there's something called interkingdom crosstalk, where these other organisms that aren't us are actually talking to our cells in these little vesicle kinds of things, and talking to our mitochondria and our nucleus. It's it's all happening, man. And so if you're having a leaky gut, you really need to fix that. There's a couple ways to kind of think about that. Leaky gut used to be this sort of fringe concept, but now it's very much thought of in conventional medicine as something to be thought of. In fact, interestingly enough, I learned about this from the pioneer in gut and celiac disease. Actually, his name is Alessio Fasano, he was a teacher at my medical school, but now he's this very prominent researcher at Harvard or something like that. But he's one of the first guys that started to talk about, no, what happens with celiac, which is a disease where you have this, sort of immune reaction to gluten, right, from, bread and wheat products, is causing a leaky gut, is causing the gut to be, allow other things inside that's increasing your propensity to have immune system dysregulation. And as a result of that, you have higher risk for infection, higher risk for inflammation, higher risk for for brain-related diseases. We know that there's lots of things that are going on there. Like if you have, leaky gut, you have a higher risk for Parkinson's and even Alzheimer's, and also the types of bacteria in your gut really matter. So how do you address this is always the question, right? So I always recommend working with a provider if possible, because kind of knowing the data. In fact, before you and I were talking today, David, I will admit that I was doing a stool collection, and that's why I was late to our podcast today. But anyway, so getting your stool checked can be really, really helpful, because you can do various types of tests to look at how well your gut is doing from a leaky gut perspective, how much immune system activation you might be having, are you digesting your foods well? And then you can do various things, like you can start certain supplements, you can like probiotics and prebiotics and postbiotics. You can change your diet, they can optimize it. In the end, what I tell people, if they're really just trying to work on their gut relatively quickly, is, usually it's trying an extreme diet. You can go carnivore, you can go full vegan, you can go full keto. In the beginning, it doesn't matter as much because you're taking out all the other shit, usually. I've had people do really well as a result of doing any of those 3 diets in the beginning, just to kind of clean things up. But after that, it's like, what are you going to do afterwards, right? So it's important, I think, work with somebody. But if you can fix your gut, if you can optimize your gut, that's 70 to 80% of your immune system, right there, which is a big piece of everything, of course.
We mentioned the cordyceps mushroom before the call. So we have to tell the listeners the story of the cordyceps mushroom before we get into how crazy the cordyceps mushroom is.
We can talk about supplements in general, like if you want to talk about like that, or where do you want to go? Yeah, sorry.
Tell me, because I don't know anything about cordyceps mushrooms, and you crazy story, but why would someone ingest cordyceps mushroom? What does it do for our immune system?
Yeah.
Do we want to take these?
Yeah. So what I love about it, there's so many different things that people can use to help with their immune system, right? I think the basics are really important, just like we talked about. But when it comes to what are some of the additional things that you can really do to kind of just give yourself an edge, right? Because most of us, I know David, I know myself, we're on planes all the time. We're subject to stuff that's not in our normal environment. Even if we have the best sleep, if you're on a plane, sleep is not going to be an option as much, right? Unless you're maybe flying first class. But even then, right, you're at 8,000 feet pressurization. So when you're on an airplane, you're more subject to infection. So what are the other things that you can do to kind of optimize your immune system? So this cordyceps mushroom is a really cool one. And I was telling David about this story because cordyceps is a mushroom that's been around for about 10,000 years plus in Chinese medicine. Okay. And the really interesting about this particular mushroom is that it is a zombifying mushroom. So if anybody's heard of the show on HBO called The Last of Us, or it's also a video game before that, although I don't play video games, but I know that's where it came from. The idea with this mushroom is that, at least in the show, what happens is that people get infected by this mushroom and it takes over their nervous systems and makes them zombies and want to eat each other. And then eventually they actually grow into cordyceps mushrooms at some point, which is kind of great. It's a great storyline for an apocalyptic kind of thing, because there's an element of truth here, because the cordyceps mushroom, what it does, its natural life cycle is to infect the nervous system of arthropods, specifically like caterpillars and ants and animals like that, and take over their nervous system and make them into zombies. And what I mean by that is that they take over their nervous system and they make that animal, that arthropod, go to a particular area where the best sunlight and best moisture is, so that they can make them into a mushroom factory. And so this animal, this insect, this ant, or this caterpillar, for example, will turn in to a beautiful looking cordyceps mushroom. And then this whole cycle starts again. So the Chinese, they were very interested in this mushroom, like what is going on with this, energetically, to create this, huge change in this, insect and do this. And so for thousands of years, it's been thought of as something that can improve immune system health, kidney health, respiratory health, and increase energy and stamina, especially the stamina in the sense of libido as well, interestingly enough. So it was used a lot and still is in Chinese medicine for all the different aspects. And so when you're talking about energy and stamina, there's actually even been some really great recent studies, David, on things like increasing your VO2 max, taking cordyceps mushroom, increasing energy production, and increasing lactic acid clearance overall, which is super interesting. But what really got my attention and my team's attention was that there was this one ingredient or one compound, the main active compound in the mushroom, called cordycepin. And cordycepin is only in a small amount in the mushroom itself. It's only about 0.03% of the mushroom itself, but it is the most potent part of the mushroom. There's other things in there. There's antioxidants, there's B vitamins, there's a little bit of GABA in there. There's even something called lovastatin, which is a statin drug. So, there's natural statins in the environment. People have heard of red yeast rice, for example. That has natural statins in it. So this has all of those things in there too. It also has, as I mentioned, B vitamins and some carbohydrate things. But cordycepin itself is the most active component, and it is about 100 times more active than the mushroom itself as an immune system optimizer and modulator. And it works in a number of different ways. It works specifically through what it's called the adenosine system in the body. Do you drink caffeine?
I love coffee.
Yeah. So most people love coffee. I love coffee as well, though I can't drink it as much. I got more sensitive to caffeine in my older age, sadly. But caffeine, what it does to keep you wakeful is that it blocks the adenosine receptors in your brain. And so adenosine has a lot of different functions. It actually helps you make energy. We'll talk about that. But in the brain, adenosine receptors, when adenosine binds, it makes you feel sleepy. So it gives you sleep pressure. And so if you have more sleep pressure, you will fall asleep faster, right? So if anybody listening has children, they will know when their kids have tons of sleep pressure because they just get so emotionally dysregulated, right? Because their body's just like, put me to bed, put me to bed, put me to bed. And so, and they know I don't want to go to bed, but as soon as they hit the pillow, they're like, done. And and that's the sleep pressure that's coming from adenosine. So if you drink caffeine, you're blocking those receptors. And so you are increasing your wakefulness overall, right? And so one of the things that cordyceps does amongst the immune system activation aspects of things, which we can talk about, is that it increases your sleep pressure by being just like adenosine and binding to those receptors. And so you'll find that you take something like cordyceps at night, you will have an increase in your deep sleep. And that's very important, of course. We need more deep sleep for a lot of different reasons, from an emotional regulation perspective, from a memory and consolidation perspective, but we also need it to heal, right? Sleep has always been said and is one of our best medicines, right? Sleep is the best medicine. And one of the reasons that's the case is that that's when our immune system can actually start cleaning things up because it doesn't have to deal with all the other things that we're doing when we're waking, when we're up, and when we're causing trouble. And so as a result, when you're sleeping, your immune system can kind of clean out your brain. It can kind of clean out your lymphatic system, which is really important. And so deep sleep is very important for that because you're getting that deeper sleep to help clear all that stuff out. So cordyceps, this active ingredient in the cordyceps mushroom, does not make you a zombie. It actually does the opposite. It actually enhances your system, making you more zombie-proof, I would say. And then it also has all these aspects that it's doing to the immune system. Actually, what's really interesting about it, there's so many things that I like about it, but cordyceps itself is actually directly antimicrobial as well. And it's also directly anti-cancer because what it does is that adenosine, so we talked about it as a neurotransmitter, right? But it also is one of your base pairs in your DNA. So adenosine is in your DNA. So in your genetic code, you have adenosine, you have guanosine, you have cytosine. And so you have adenosine in there, right? And it's also what's transcribed to make new proteins and to make new bugs. So when your bugs, your bacteria get into the system and they start making you feel sick, or your viruses as well, they are replicating themselves. And they have to have adenosine to be able to do that. But the cool thing about cordyceps is it's not exactly adenosine. It's a little bit different than that. So as a result of that, it can get interculcated. It can get stuck into that replication process. And then when it does, it blocks further replication. So you can't make any more virus, right? Which you can't make any more cancer cells. And so it's being studied now as an anti-cancer at higher doses because of this potential option. And so it's an antimicrobial directly as a result of that. But then in addition to being antimicrobial and potentially anti-cancer, it's also revving up the immune system, improving your ability for your various types of immune cells to work better, like macrophages and neutrophils and your B cells and your T cells and things like that. These are all different types of white blood cells that are in your body that are working in various ways depending on what kind of bugs that you're being subject to. And then this particular compound can help as a result of what it does in these various ways, working on the adenosine system for the most part, doing all of these things, revving up things like you've heard of probably AMPK and then decreasing NF-kappa B and mTOR and all those kinds of fun things.
Okay, I have so many questions about this interesting mushroom because of the way it affects the adenosine system and it impacts sleep. So if one were to take this product, would one take it in the evening, right? You wouldn't take it in the morning because it's going to mess with your caffeine high.
Unless you take a low dose and you pair it with caffeine. Because what you can do here, and you can try this, is that, so adenosine, the other aspect of what adenosine does, and we were alluding to this earlier, is that adenosine is in adenosine triphosphate, which is ATP, right? This is our energy currency. And so you can create something called CTP or cordyceps triphosphate using cordyceps as we've been describing it here. And so if you block the adenosine receptors in the brain, so that adenosine won't bind there or cordyceps won't bind there. And then instead you can sort of divert it to your energy production system. You can take a low dose of cordyceps after you've taken your caffeine, so you block those receptors. And as long as it's a low dose, if you take too high of a dose of cordyceps, it will make you sleepy regardless because you'll have too much adenosine. So for the most part, I have people taking cordyceps at night before they go to bed. because it increases deep sleep. It's going to help with the immune system, everything we talked about. But you can take a very low dose of it along with caffeine to increase your capacity to make energy. And if you look at
VO2 max.
increasing your VO2 max, yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So if you look at the studies on cordyceps, you can see those studies. They're actually showing that it does increase energy capacity. It increases VO2 max. It increases ATP production. And the reason why you can use the cordyceps mushroom in the morning is it has a much less cordycepin in it by weight. It's only 0.03%. So it's a very small amount of cordycepin in there. So if you're looking at, from an energy production perspective, you may want to check out the cordyceps mushroom directly first, just because it's well studied. And I have, like a lot of my clients just use that for energy. And then for like immune system activation, for antimicrobial capacity and also anti-inflammatory capacity, the active ingredient is much more potent. It's also been studied in allergies, like mast cell activation, even in gut issues too, in helping with gut inflammation. And this is actually one of the ways when I was testing it, we were looking at gut inflammation as one of the markers, because a colleague of mine who started the company, Dr. Ted, who I mentioned earlier, he does a lot of traveling to other countries. And then if you travel in your 12 hours difference in time zones, your gut doesn't understand that. Your gut wants to be awake when you're supposed to be sleeping. And you know how this goes, David. And so, but he was using the cordycepin at high doses. He would typically have to go up like at least 1 or 2 pant sizes when he travels. It's because of the bloating that he would get from inflammation. I didn't get it at all. And then we've sort of had some trials here in people with allergies. I've been working with mast cell activation and also in neurodivergent kids as well, interestingly enough, because these kids have a hard time getting deep sleep. Their immune system and their brain is very highly active. And so it seems to be helping regulate that as well. Some really cool use cases overall.
Okay, so now we've talked about sort of 2 different wings of this product or molecule. So if I wanted to go and buy myself some cordyceps mushroom, I have no idea, like I'm not going to go chase down a beetle somewhere. Where do I get this thing?
Well, so if you're going to buy the cordyceps mushroom, you can get it it's really available almost anywhere at this point, because so initially back 10,000 years ago, they would harvest it from the backs of caterpillars. And so this is in the Himalaya mountains. So it was only for the very, very rich, the highest echelons of society in Chinese society at the time. But now it can be cultivated. It's a different type of cordyceps, but it's a very similar kind of profile. And so you can go to any store where you trust where you're getting your herbs from, and you'll find cordyceps there. From a cordycepin perspective, so we have at Transcriptions, my company, we have something called Tromune. Tromune, Tromune, M-U-N-E. And Tromune is a high potency extract of the cordyceps mushroom, and it's cordycepin. So it's very difficult to find cordycepin anywhere, actually, other than in our product. We're the first company to concentrate it to this high amount and put it in a commercial product. We have it in Immune. We also have it. We have 2 different strengths. We have a Tromune 75 milligram strength and a Tro Plus Mune, which is 150. The Tro Plus Mune is available to practitioners only in clinical practice. So if you have a clinician, they can start selling it in their office, or they can drop ship it to you from our company. But the 75 milligrams is kind of what I take on a regular basis, somewhere like 37.5 to 75 milligrams on a regular basis, what I take personally. And I can tell you, David, that the last year, I mean, with all my travel, with all of my kids, it's been the best year I've had, ever, really. And it's hard when you're taking immune system products, right? Because you don't know if it's something that's working for you because you're not getting sick, right? But if it does increase your deep sleep, as it will for many people, you will see that benefit, pretty straight out. And in fact, we have in our sleep product, the Transcriptions Tro-Z, we have a lower dose of the cordycepin at 40 milligrams because of that deep sleep. The 40 milligram dose is kind of your cutoff for where you're going to see the deep sleep improvements using cordycepin itself. But if you're going to go out and purchase cordycepin, like the active ingredient, right? That's 0.03% of the mushroom. So 75 milligrams of cordycepin is like 75 grams of mushroom, which is a crap ton of mushrooms that I don't recommend anybody eat on a regular basis. So, we've done what we always do here at Transcriptions, as you know, David, is like try to take and find these compounds and, find their most active components and then create these products that can really be, utilized on a regular basis to help us, in this case, with our immune system.
So you sent me some of the product, and it comes in these little squares, and each square has 4 little squares.
Yeah.
So how many little squares is 75?
75 milligrams. The way we develop these things at Transcriptions, they're called buccal troches. And that's because they're buccal, they go in your mouth, they dissolve between your upper cheek and gum, take about 15 to 30 minutes. And as a result of being in the mouth here, you bypass digestion, which can degrade things and make them less active. And also you make it work faster. So if you really need like acute immune system activation, so if I'm on a plane, for example, I have a long haul, like a 6-hour flight, I'm going to be dissolving in my mouth because it's going to increase my capacity to maybe get some sleep on the plane. And it's also going to be protecting me. I'll also be using methylene blue and other things as well, of course. But in general, with TruImmune, I have people typically swallow it because if you swallow it on an empty stomach before bed, that's totally fine too. You just don't want to have it if like you're eating food or anything else that's going to slow digestion down. So like at night, so what I will typically do is take the 37.5, which is that half of the full troche or a full troche, depending on what's going on. As far as if I'm traveling, if I'm not traveling, if something's going on at my house, somebody's sick or somebody might be sick, then I might take more. If I'm acutely feeling like I'm getting ill, then I'll take 150 milligrams, which is our higher strength version, which would be 2 troches of the Dromion that you have there, David. And then I'll take that for 3 to 5 days. And I'm seeing massive benefit. When I travel, when I'm at conferences and I'm speaking and I'm exhibiting, I'll usually take 150 on a nightly basis. What you'll find that's interesting is that, so if you dissolve in your mouth, you'll find that your deep sleep in the beginning of the night will get longer. Okay. If you swallow it, you'll find that you get an extra bump of deep sleep sometime earlier in the morning before you wake up. And so like for my wife, for example, who probably gets like a ton of deep sleep, she doesn't check anything, she doesn't need to. But like when I gave it to her when she was feeling ill or feeling like she was coming down with something, I gave her 150 for 3 to 5 days, maybe I think 3 days. And she woke up saying, wow, I never usually get that much sleep when I'm feeling sick, number one, which is great. And number two is that she was better in that about 5 days total. And she would typically get the cough that doesn't go away for 2 to 4 weeks after she gets her, her viral cold kind of thing. And I have to kick her out of bed or she kicks me out of bed because I can't deal. So I was being selfish and trying to give her some TruImmune, but it worked. And now she doesn't listen to me for anything. She won't ever listen to this podcast, so it doesn't matter. When she does feel like she's getting sick, she will ask me for the TruImmune, which is a big thing. You've been married a long time, I think, too, David, but I've known my wife for 20 years, and like she listens to me very little at this point in my life, and that's okay. That's okay. She rocks it otherwise. But
okay, that's fantastic. I'm going to try that tonight.
There's 2 ways to use TruImmune, I say, and like this is the high strength 7. Is you can use it prophylactically on a regular basis, like just to kind of keep your immune system a little bit more activated, a little more modulated. What I mean by activated, I mean just more available to help you if you need it, right? And I usually will have people take a lower dose if that's the case, 37.5 just to maybe 75 milligrams, depending on the situation. If you are doing it a different way, you can say, okay, well, I'm going to only use this when I'm under more stress. Like, so if I'm traveling, if somebody in the house is sick, if I'm feeling more stressed, then you can use it then as well. It's more of like a targeted kind of way. But I found like the sweet spot for me and also for the clients that I've been working on this with is to use it on a regular basis at low doses. Or if it's somebody that has a chronic inflammatory condition or a neurocognitive inflammatory thing, especially, I would be tightening the dose starting off lower, but then going higher as well to like the professional strength in those cases. And sometimes using 75 milligrams with dinner and then 75 milligrams before they go to bed, or even 150 milligrams twice in the evening for short periods of time for like severe allergies, autoimmune conditions, and others. But that's usually more under clinical supervision in those cases. But from day-to-day operations, low dose prophylactic or a slightly higher dose for more targeted, and then very low dose, like even like a quarter of the troche that you have there with caffeine as an energy enhancer to give that a try. It works really well. It's cool. It's cool.
I remember in one of our previous podcasts, there was a discussion about methylene blue plus low dose psilocybin to increase creativity and focus.
I think I was talking about LSD plus caffeine, maybe. That's another good combination if people can find, and that's legal or whatever. Yeah. Psilocybin plus a little bit of caffeine, like you can do it, like, and then methylene. Yeah, there's ways to do it. And maybe L-S glucanatine, that's one of our products, but be careful. Again, I can't recommend any of these things. They're not legal to use. Lots of different combinations. Actually, one of the other combinations, David, just to say is that I have people take TruImmune plus Tro-Z at night together. So Tro-Z is our sleep formula. It has 8 different ingredients in it, one of them being cordyceps, but it also works on the GABA system, serotonin, melatonin. There's all the things going on. It's a fantastic formula. So a lot of people often take like a half of that troche along with a quarter to a half of the immune. That's a fantastic combination because it's going to increase deep sleep. It's going to support all the stages of your sleep as well. Like a lot of our sleep aids, many people know this, like people love taking Benadryl before they go to bed because it knocks them out, but then it also messes up their deep sleep. THC also messes up your deep sleep, although it can get people to bed. I get that, but it's not great over the long term. All your benzodiazepines, all your Ambiens, they all screw up your sleep. So trying to avoid those. So Tro-Z plus TruImmune is a great combination for the evenings for a lot of people. So I'll have them do, depending on their sleep issues. If it's mostly deep sleep, then maybe it'll be higher on the TruImmune and lower on the Tro-Z. Or if it's more of a kind of combination of everything, then maybe higher on the Z a little bit on the cordyceps and the immune.
Wow. Okay. Better living through modern chemistry. There we go.
Well, we don't live in an ancient world. We don't live
No,
in
we
nature anymore. We live in little creature habitats with bad lighting and bad air, and we can do things about these, of course, but we need things that are supernatural. That doesn't work.
yeah.
They're not always, directly from the earth to help us more than we.
I didn't mean that in a derogatory way.
I know, I know.
What I swallow with my smoothie in the morning, my wife is appalled. I don't know, it seems to work for me.
Yeah, your wife and my wife both.
It gives me some sense of like agency and control, but at the same time, like, I mean, people, they look at me and they're like, "You're what age?" And it's like, well, it may not work for you, but this is what works for me. So
Exactly. Right. And to each their own. And we're just here to do the best that we can. And again, when we feel better, everybody around us is going to feel better as well
that's
because we're not assholes. So that's good, right? As long as you're not an asshole, it's better, right? So that's what I
100%. This is fantastic. Scott, every time we do a podcast, I send it to all my medical friends.
Okay.
And it's like, hey, you should listen to this.
I haven't gotten hate mail yet from them. So I guess that's probably a good
No,
thing, I guess.
I find it super informative. You
I
know, a lot of
appreciate it.
practitioners, they don't have the education, or the time to like dive into a lot of these things, like, you know, the sort of knowledge that you have. So,
Well, I appreciate the time and I appreciate the platform, David, to help people with their immune system, balancing their parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. That's key. And yeah, I think Immune is a fantastic addition to the basics, or when you don't have the capacity to do a lot of those basics when we're in modern world doing modern things too much of the time, kind of thing. So it's a fantastic addition. It's been great for my family, for me, and for my patients. And then we have tons of practitioners and people all over the country using it.
super. Thank you so much.
See you next time, man.